Competition Commission of India. Some of you may have never heard about this body, while those of you who have been following GK Today or the newspapers regularly might know that this body recently got a new chairman. To give you a quick intro, Competition Commission of India or the CCI is an expert body regulating anti-competitive practices in the country. If that rings a bell, you might have come across this name in newspaper reports. That is, when companies were found or accused of resorting to unfair trade practices. With this small intro, let's quickly dive into it. As stated earlier, CCI is an expert body regulating anti-competitive practices in the country and was established under the Competition Act 2002 for the administration, implementation, and enforcement of the Act. We have listed different anti-competitive practices in a separate video, or this video would have been a pretty long video. Let's look at its objectives. The first one is to prevent practices having adverse effect on the competition, to promote and sustain competition in the markets, to promote and protect the interest of the consumers, and to ensure freedom of trade. The Competition Act 2002 was passed by the Parliament in the year 2002, to which the President accorded assent in January 2003. It was subsequently amended by the Competition Amendment Act 2007 and 9. You might ask why? Reason being challenge to certain provisions of the Act and because of certain observations of the Honorable Supreme Court. Thus, the Act was amended. Earlier to it, there was another Act called MRTP Act, or the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969, which was repealed and replaced by the Competition Act 2002, with effect from 1st September 2009. Again a question why? Basically to remove the shortcomings of the MRTP Act. Thus, in accordance with the provisions of the Amendment Act, two bodies were created, the Competition Commission of India and the Competition Appellate Tribunal. Competition Appellate Tribunal was established to hear and dispose of appeals against decisions made by the CCI. We will talk about it more when dealing with working of the Commission later in the video. Another important information to note is that Ministry of Corporate Affairs or MCA is responsible for administering the Competition Act 2002. Speaking of MCA, it is primarily concerned with the administration of the New Companies Act 2013, the Old Companies Act 1956, the Limited Liability Partnership Act 2008, and other allied acts and rules and regulations which are formed from time to time, thus regulating the functioning of the corporate sector in accordance with the law. A good to know fact about MCA is that it exercises supervision over three professional bodies, namely Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Institute of Company Secretaries, and the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, all of which are constituted under three separate acts of the Parliament. Coming back to the CCI and its composition, Section 8(1) of the Act provides that CCI shall consist of a chairperson and not less than 2 and not more than 6 members. Recently, the Appointments Committee of the Cabinet, headed by Prime Minister, has appointed former IS officer Ashok Kumar Gupta as chairperson. He replaces acting chairperson Sudhir Mittal. Mr. Gupta will be in office till 25th October 2022, that is, till he attained the age of 65 years or until further orders, whichever is the earliest. Mr. Gupta is former IS officer of the Tamil Nadu cadre. Let's talk about the functions of CCI now. Apart from the objectives as we saw earlier, which form part of its functions, the Commission is also required to give opinions on competition issues on a reference received from a statutory authority established under any law. Statutory authority here can be a central government, state government, or any other statutory bodies which have been created. It can also include regulators of the market. And another function is to undertake competition advocacy, create public awareness, and impart training on competition issues. Another important function through which the Commission maintains a control over the competition scenario in the market is that Commission has the power to inquire into unfair agreements or abuse of dominant position or combinations, that is, two companies merging together or one company buying another, taking place outside India but having adverse effects on the competition scene within India. Now, to deal with such cross-border issues, Commission is empowered to enter into any kind of memorandum of understanding or any other arrangements with any foreign agency of any foreign country with prior approval of the central government. As stated earlier, being one of the important regulators of the market, Commission has the power to investigate, take actions, and impose penalties if found guilty. Commission can initiate an inquiry either on its own, that is on the basis of information and knowledge in its possession, or on receipt of an information from an aggrieved party, which might be a person or a firm, on receipt of a reference from the central government or a state government or any other statutory authority. Generally, a commission directs the Director General appointed under the Act to investigate the matter and report his findings to the Commission. It is important to note that the Commission may or may not agree with the findings of the Director General's report and can give their own views. Few years back, the Competition Amendment Bill 2012 was introduced in Lok Sabha on December 10, 2012 by the then Minister of the Corporate Affairs. The bill seeks to amend the Competition Act 2002. For this, in 2011, the government had constituted an expert committee under Yashwant Sinha to examine the Competition Act and recommend necessary modifications. Based on these recommendations, the government had introduced the Competition Amendment Bill 2012. Though this bill was introduced in 2012, present or the current status of the bill is that it has lapsed, but recently, that is in September 2008, it was reported by Economic Times that the government has constituted a new panel to review the competition law. The committee will review the Competition Act, rules and regulations in view of changing business environment and bring in necessary changes if required. The committee will also look into international best practices in the competition fields, especially antitrust laws, merger guidelines and handling cross-border competition issues. Current status, it is in progress. The new review committee is chaired by Corporate Affairs Secretary Injayati Srinivas. He had earlier chaired Committee to develop National Sports Development Code. This committee was set up to study the existing sports governance framework within the country, and this is applicable across sports disciplines in India. If you have been watching this video till the end, thank you so much for sticking around. And as stated earlier, if you have no idea as to what anti-competitive practices are and how it affects us as a consumer and the market itself, watch out for our next video, that is Top 10 Anti-Competitive Practices. Thank you.